Hello, everyone. Since today's guest comes from Catalonia, which is a region of Spain, I thought it would be appropriate to do a blooper in Catalan. However, I could not find one. So the next best thing is to do one in Spanish. And this is something very simple. It was a construction site which was walled off or boarded off with a little wooden fence. And at the top, it said in English, do not enter here. And in Spanish, it said at the bottom, entrero somewhere else. So basically, a play on English of people who can't speak Spanish. And entrero somewhere else sounds, of course, like Spanish, but entrero in Spanish means whole or entire. And it should have said, if the person spoke properly, prohibito el paso. But in any case, that is what happens when you use a non-professional linguist to do translations that should be done correctly. And Anna knows that because our guest is Anna Schlegel, and she certainly knows that because she has worked in the globalization industry for many years. Anna N. Schlegel is truly global. She provides an insider's look at how enterprises move into international markets to successfully deliver and scale their product offerings to customers across different cultures. She has unlocked new and significant net revenue for organizations she has worked with, and in her 30 years of experience leading expansion in the technology industry, such as GM or the Vice President of Globalization. Anna has brought Japan's NetApp business from ranking number 12 to number 1 in data storage as just one example. She has worked extensively driving global market growth by entering new markets, enabling joint ventures in China and OEM partnerships in Asia and Europe. Her strategy leverages the product and enterprise's strategic upfront investment to build a comprehensive strategy for global expansion and to support the company's growth goals. Thank you, Anna. It's a pleasure that you joined us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Philip. Thanks for having me.
So let's start by asking what general principles you use for developing a global strategy.
Usually inside a corporation, which is only I've worked for pretty large corporations, we align very well with the CEO team and the strategy office, if there is one, very close to the chief strategy officer always. I worked very closely at VMware and at NetApp with the chief strategy officers. Here at Procore, same thing, right? So we work very closely with the strategy office to understand, right, what markets are the ones we want to go in. We do a lot of due diligence. So my team is part of doing the due diligence usually of what countries, in what order, and why, and how. Because once you get into a market, you're in, and it's a really big investment. You can get in, obviously, with opening offices and hiring people and placing, a smaller setup to drive the products and the solutions. You can also get in just with language and some support and some collateral, right? So we look at what are the markets that we need to be in. At Procore, we are in 192 countries. There's not that many more.
Wow.
So it's a really large, the platform has reached the world. Let's put it that way.
And Procore is in the construction business, correct?
Procore, yes. Procore Technologies is a cloud-based platform where general contractors and owners and subcontractors and anybody in the whole orchestration of construction can work together. So our goal is to connect all the tasks, all the workflows, all the processes that they need to take care of, compliances, working with engineers, working with architects, working with subcontractors, working with folks that are financing these large construction projects. So we have it all in one platform. And again, this platform, super powerful. We have some of the biggest, largest contractors around the world, general contractors. And we are globalizing it to get into many, many countries. We will obviously not globalize it for 192 countries,
Right.
but we have a good set of languages already.
I think the United Nations has 192 or 193 members, so it seems that you've covered the entire world.
That's right. And we do check against the list of the United Nations. We do check that for compliance.
Amazing. Please give me some examples of how you have modified your strategy to enter some specific country markets. I presume one size does not fit all. So what have you done to adjust accordingly?
Yes. So as you were saying, I've been in this space now 31 years, leading different strategies for different companies. Some companies are channel first. So there's a huge distribution model through what's called pathways, and pathways can be distributors, pathways can be resellers. So there is a partner play or pathway play. In China, I've seen only one joint venture, which we made happen for NetApp. And that was really very interesting and probably—
I'm sorry, you made for what? It wasn't clear.
For NetApp, we led a joint venture. And that was probably the most complex orchestration, the longest I've ever seen, and the most thrilling also, because not a lot of companies do joint ventures in China at the scale of, a company like NetApp. And obviously there's all the direct models of selling and inside sales, and that, that tends to be most of the case. So there's different ways of getting in. Obviously, you need the whole orchestration with the go-to-market teams, a lot of marketing, product marketing, sales enablement, very strong support teams as well.
And you were just talking about your joint venture in China. China's increasingly becoming sort of ever more authoritarian and restrictive. Do you have any special provisions or techniques that you cannot do or you can do there that you cannot do elsewhere?
So what you need to do in China is it's a huge decision, and not a lot of companies get into China at the scale of a platform, okay, at the scale of a technology or a cloud-based platform. You need to study it a lot. You need to have connections there. So typically people from the board are going to have some connection in China. It can be, the executives of sales have connections in China. And then you need to spend a fair amount there talking to analysts, so their own analysts, to even see if there is a place for you. It's a very careful study and due diligence it takes a few years. In our case at NetApp, it took several years, right? I work very closely with IDC. So we partner with IDC in China. They have a very strong presence there, and they will guide you. I'm sorry,
IDC, I know International Data Corporation, but what else is IDC?
IDC is an analyst firm that, it's like any other analyst firm. They're very specialized in getting into China. And so we partnered very, very closely with them, to the point that I would bring them to NetApp to speak to the executives. We did several workshops, brown bags, to explain the opportunity that they saw. They saw it there. It's one thing that they see the opportunity and they can help liaise with the Chinese counterparts that are dancing around to marry you, right? But then you need to make sure that the executive team wants to do it. It's a significant investment, and to do a joint venture, basically you're creating a third company. And so there's a very careful design of a new board, of a new team, of a new office, and new offerings, because the joint venture will create a third company that will not necessarily be able to use your products, right?
Huh. Very interesting. Do those strategies for entering China differ from the strategies when you sell to Taiwan?
Yes, I mean, entering Taiwan usually happens through websites or through resellers or through companies. For example, in the construction world, we have quite a bit of demand to serve Taiwan. And that can be done through just doing language, for example. And even, that can be done just through language. You need to have the platform perfectly globalized. You need to have support as well, right? Because they are going to call you. You need to have collateral. And I think it's much easier to get in like that. You can do it just with language.
And that raises the question of language localization. Do you have inside or in-house linguistic teams, or do you outsource to language agencies?
I have always, in any company, always outsourced it. So as I consider myself a business person, because usually I run more than just the globalization team, and I have a P&L or a GM sort of role, where to me, we have overly developed translating agencies, localization agencies they're great, that are perfect partners. And it's unnecessary to me in the space that I've been to have to bring in translators. I think translators, in my case, have always been on the vendor side. What we do make sure, though, is that we train them really well, because every company that I have worked for has very, very complex products. Right. They're not, I'm buying a pencil or I'm buying a notebook that everybody knows how to translate those things. So in the case of VMware, it's all in virtualization. And not only is the software or the platform complex, we're innovating. I've only worked for companies that are creating new things that did not exist. So we're the ones that have to create the names of what are we going to call this product. And so we work very closely with the naming teams in product marketing. We work very closely with the agencies, leaders, to make sure that we train or even certify the translators. So we have created courses, for example, now for Procore technologies, because there's not that many translators that really understand the world of construction. The world of construction is fascinating. How you say one thing in one country is not going to fly for another country. And so we have to be very, very careful. So for example, we're serving a handful of English variants, because saying bidding in one country is going to be called tendering in another country. And so we have to constantly be localizing the keywords of the platform. And the world of construction changes all the time. There's new technologies, especially now with artificial intelligence, how we're going to call things on, virtual reality, things that we can do with ocular systems. And so, these agencies are great, but they need to be able to keep up with us, but we have a role in training them as well.
You raised two very interesting points. And since, as you may know, I run a 30-year-old language agency, I'm very familiar with these points. And one of the ones that you made initially is critical, and a lot of people forget it, a lot of companies forget it, and that is what I call name evaluation or name screening, to always check the name of your company and your product and your slogan or your tagline before you enter any foreign market, and at least to do it across, say, 10 major languages, because if you've got one mistake or one gaffe, it can make your company look incredibly foolish or stupid. And that's not a reputation you want to gain. So,
No, you were talking about blunders. There was I think it was a car. I believe it was a Seat that was named Nova, and in Spanish, Nova means it doesn't go, right? Doesn't
exactly.
run. So that was a big blunder.
Right. Actually, that was one of the original blunders that was popular in the 1950s. And from what I've read, that actually never happened. Chevrolet introduced that in Mexico, and they did know that Nova in Spanish means does not go, and so they didn't do that. But Ford and others have done similar mistakes. Ford introduced the Pinto car into Brazil, and Pinto in Brazilian Portuguese slang means, shall we say, male genitals. Not a very good name for a car.
No, not at all.
AMC introduced the Matador in Puerto Rico and other Latin countries, and Matador basically means killer. So not, again, not a very good name for a car. So you raised that excellent point. The other, that's the other point about language that you just raised. I just forgot what it was, but that will come back to me. I did want to ask also regarding language, what kind of cultural adaptations have you had for your products? Oh, I'm sorry, before I get to that, I do remember what I wanted to say, what I wanted to add, and it dovetails with my question. Just in English alone, in British English and American English, in British English, they talk about the name, we would say, we would name a building, such as the Chrysler Building in New York. We would say the Chrysler Building. Whereas in British English, they use the word house, Trafalgar House. And that simply means, again, the name of the building. And the word mansion in construction business, or certainly a mansion in American English, means an extremely large house, where in British English, it simply can just mean not a house necessarily, but just another name for a building. Or hotel in French can either mean hotel, or it can just mean, again, a kind of a building. So just those simple words in construction have multiple meanings, and that's where it can get very tricky in language, of course.
That's it, yeah.
So I did want to ask you, in terms of linguistic teams or the cultural adaptations you needed to make, can you give some examples of how that worked in different languages?
Yeah, the cultural adaptation that we do first is not necessarily around changing words, right? From the bidding to the tendering or the house of, what the examples that you were doing are important. But to us, these are, the platform is used by the project managers, by the document managers, by the architects, by the engineers, by the supervisors, by the superintendents. And so what these folks need to have is a platform that resonates with their country compliance. So not everybody does taxation the same. Not everybody needs to be logging staff hours the same. Not everybody does change orders the same.
Right.
And so to us, where we spend a lot of time, or we do an incredible amount of customer due diligence, is in how do they work? How do they run construction in their country? And in many cases, even different provinces are going to request different things, right? So we're very strong in Canada, as an example, where the Quebec region may be requesting a new compliance for inspections or permits or safety rules. Construction has a lot to do around safety. Project management and safety is very important. So how those things are being tracked, how their financials are being tracked, how their documentation management. So there's different ISO standards, especially very strong in the UK, that are not necessarily needed or the same in Australia.
Right.
So to us, when we talk about culturalization, we call it product market fit, because our clients are both, they're either in an office, making the deal of we're going to make this construction in Paris or in Sydney or in the Middle East. And so there's a lot around the business part, the bidding, the preparing of the bid. But then once they get going, a lot happens inside trailers. We've all seen construction, architects with the hard hats inside trailers with the project managers and the schedulers. But at the same time, you see the supervisors and the actual construction workers are on live sites that can be highways, can be airports, can be subways, right? And so we study that. That is almost, I don't want to say more important, but it is more important.
Yes.
And then those processes will understand the sort of people that need to sign off papers, that need to, clock lists, we call them punch lists, or once we understand that process, then we can name those steps.
Right.
And so those steps is where we have to be really careful of how do we call these things, right? For an example would be here in the States, the project managers have these punch lists where they need to record what happened in every single corner or every single hour. And one of the blunders that I saw in Latin America is we were calling them listas punch, right? And that was one of my first ahas. It was like, nobody knows what a punch is in Mexico. And so that was one of the first things, like, clean that up. And it's a little bit also the journey of companies into getting into other countries sometimes too fast or without the right resources, right? So when we came in here, I've been at Procore now for 2 years. One of the first things, I came to run international product and the flexibility of the platform and global infrastructure. One of the first things that I said is, I would love to manage the localization team as well, so that we could start addressing these things. And we address them really quickly, and it's fine, right? But where I spend most of my time is in understanding what do governments require, what do these general contractors need to do their job, owners and all the subcontractors, etc. How do they use the platform, basically?
Yeah, so as you're saying, it's understanding the compliance, the regulatory, the financial issues of each country or each state or each province, which of course I presume you prepare that in English first, and then you translate it into the target language.
Usually it is. Usually most of Procore employees are in the States. So Procore did not start going global until 2017. And my org was placed about 2 years ago. So that's when we started to really step it up and do, what we globalizers do, which is very deep product work, very deep internationalization work, a lot of engineering, re-engineering, a lot of making sure that we can bring innovation so that we use the latest techniques on internationalization. And then obviously bringing in localization testing and a lot of things that we didn't have before. And so I feel that now, after a couple of years, we have a very good, engine inside. It's we're still obviously working on it, but to get into any language much better. Yeah.
When you go abroad, do you primarily work with distributors in each country, or do you have actual development and sales and marketing offices in each country, or is it a combination?
So for now, Procore is very much direct. So we have the offices, we have the teams, we have the inside sales, we have the account executives. So it's very much direct, but we are, starting to, we do have some partnerships and we're heading that way more and more. And Latin America is a place where we're testing that out now.
Interesting. Procore specifically, or other companies in general, because you've worked with many firms, do you generally seek a market share or a competitive edge or an ROI or some other measure? What constitutes success, and does this differ by country?
It differs. So, companies are looking for annual revenue, right? Or additional ARR. So we do look at all of it. We look at the TAM, which is the total addressable market. We look at the SAM. We look at the additional revenue.
I'm sorry, can you define SAM?
It's the addressable market. It's not the total, but it's the more realistic one. So we then have targets, obviously, like every single company, right? We have targets per geography. I mean, this is your typical sales setup. And from a product perspective, we look at project activity. We look at tools that are being used. We look at what parts of the platform are not being used. We look at the bottlenecks inside a specific workflow. So we can say, these many thousands of users or customers are using or not using a specific part of the platform, which is, when you run a platform, it's the same everywhere. It's the same I saw at VMware or at NetApp, where you look at what tools are being used the most, or what products are being used the most, and which ones are not. And the ones that matter for the whole connection of the platform or the flywheel of the platform, that's where we investigate quite a bit to untangle that, to get it, to unstuck it, let's say. Right. So project activity is very important. Obviously, we have a lot of metrics. We have the typical metrics that any, I think, globalizer would have, right? Technical debt. We look at technical debt, we look at quality, we look at speed of localization. But really, also what's very important is how the product is being used. We spent years, sometimes 1 to 2 years, developing a product or making a product enterprise ready. So right now my team is working on 2 or 3 of those, and we're about to call them GA, right? General availability. When the product is enterprise ready, then we make sure that the field really is enabled to sell that product, right? There's a lot of things we measure.
And this is the process that you've used for other companies you've worked for as well?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, it's your typical
globalization process.
No, it's not a globalization process. It's like an operation of the company, right? Like product and technology or R&D build something that is needed very much in the market. Otherwise, you don't go there. If it's not needed, don't embark on that. And then you need to make sure that what you're building is going to be sustained. You can't just like create a tool and then drop it, right? So you need a squad, you need a tripod of engineering leaders and product managers assigned to that, so that the product will keep growing and keep doing its thing year over year. And then you need a very strong go-to-market function. And that comes with understanding what are the markets, what are the countries, what are the languages, and a product market fit approach as well, because you can one size does not fit all, and it's very, very true in the world of construction because of government compliances.
what kind of projects over your 30-year career, what kind of projects have you been most proud of? Not just at Procore.
My most, I would say, is the incredible amount of innovation that I've seen throughout the years, from being one of the first people in the early 90s already using machine translation, right? And then talk about blunders. When we were at Cisco, we were a small team already working with IBM TM2 that we were trying to localize using machine translation behind the scenes. So what I'm most proud of is the contributions of my teams and how hard we've pushed for innovation, and the fact that we had a pretty big role, I think, in MT and then in NMT and then in AI. One of my most proud moments was to see, patents be in the US patent library, right? Of things that I've developed or my teams have developed, especially around internationalization and bypassing of a lot of manual processes. I'm very fascinated also with content strategies and AI and content. So I've been working on the field of content and AI maybe for the past 10 years, where we at NetApp ended up with a content lake where we could see who is double authoring, what's the total content for the company, is that content searchable, is that content well authored, things like this. I love to think really big and have patents or trade secrets. Those things, like, really, I enjoy it a lot. And then I would say probably even more to see people that have worked for me or in my teams doing similar things. Like, I'm very, I think I'm an inventor, and I like to push the limit. And some people say, you're not the cutting edge, you're the edge, like, because I see, I think because I've worked so much in engineering and in strategy and in marketing and in product for 30 years, you can see how you can use different techniques that the chief product officers have. You can apply them, techniques that chief data officers have, you can apply them. So there's so many models and frameworks out there, right? To think, to strategize, and then to just really connect the dots. Like, we don't have to stay in our lane of like the typical workflow. I like to completely disrupt them, right? I remember at NetApp, it was the first time, and I don't know that many companies can do this, we were able to send content from the .com, so from the netapp.com, into, I think it was 17 languages, the first pilot that we did, into an NNT workflow that came back to the website within minutes. That was like the wildest thing I've ever seen in my life. And it's possible. It's possible because we have incredible workflows to translation management systems. It's possible because of NNT.
Right. Can you define NMT for our listeners, for our viewers?
Excuse me?
Can you define NMT for our listeners?
Oh, yes, sorry. It's neural machine translation.
Neural machine translation.
Yeah, which is the evolution of machine translation, right? And when you're saying what are you most proud of, is like, gosh, translations are not the issue. Systems have beautiful APIs, and we've developed neural machine translation for so many years now. Come on. So I always ask the heads of websites or marketing or product content management systems that going global should not be an issue because of localization. It may be an issue because of compliances or ISO standards or not knowing what markets to hit. But localization teams are incredible because they can speed up how you go to market so fast, so fast. And so I think that is a victory, because it used to take months and weeks. And so I shrink it and I shrink it and I shrink it and I shrink it. And I can tell you, when I started at NetApp, I was one person. And
Wow.
when I left NetApp, we were many, many, many. And we were able to do this beautiful thing of seeing content just go within, I think it was within 2 hours, the content was right back on the website and published.
It's amazing.
And I watched it. I was like, I need to see this thing. I watched the whole workflow go through with the vice president of digital marketing. And we were like, oh my God, because we both had been at NetApp for many, many years, and we almost cried because we're crazy on innovation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool stuff. You can do a lot of cool stuff in internationalization, in localization, in the workflows to the translation management system. But for that, you need a very strong platform, right? You need a content management system, and you need an incredible translating agency behind it as well, because this NMT is only as good as what you've invested in, right? And so
Exactly.
if you have a great corpus of content, which is, we're talking about LLMs, right? Like these large language models. Well, guess what? We curated these databases for years. We paid for this beautiful content for years. So now let's use it very quickly, right?
One of the aspects of the whole development process that you didn't mention, but I assume as part of it, was market research to determine first whether an innovation would be welcome in a new market.
That's right, yeah.
Right. And how do you go about, how do you or did you go about the market research process without divulging what you were planning to do? Was it hypothetical? If we could develop this for you, would you adopt it, or is it something else?
No, it's completely customer based. So all our product teams, so inside our product organization, folks, we have a rule that people, if you're a product leader, you're talking to at least 3 to 4 customers a week. So, and the product teams are inside different pillars or inside different divisions, right? So we have product leaders inside the pre-construction part of the platform. We have product leaders dedicated to the financials part of the platform. We have product leaders inside the project management and safety side of the platform. So they are completely in tune and in sync with what is needed. We don't build, we would never, ever build without an incredible amount of customer phone calls. We are completely customer first at Procore, because once we go, we invest, a lot of humans in engineering and UX, in the product leadership team. So there's a lot of investment, and this investment has to come with a lot of customer data. And so we get on a lot of customer one-on-ones, customer larger settings. We do a lot of deep dives. I send a lot of teams around the world to study and sit and do innovation labs. We're constantly going, every 2 or 3 weeks, we have a team leaving somewhere else and coming back with, the requirements, to validate the requirements as the engineering and the product work is getting done, right? And usually they come back is like, whoops, we forgot one thing, or we need to modify one thing. But we want to make sure that it's a very common, we have so many customers and we're in so many countries, right? So we cannot customize for one customer, but so we look for the commonalities and what are the current customers asking for. Yeah.
And this is primarily done by each of your, I'll call them siloed project leaders, or the project leading teams in finance and safety and leadership and so forth, by talking to your customers and finding out.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call them siloed, because everybody in product understands very well the network effect and how these tools need to be connected and what comes first and what touches what. Right. So they understand. These are incredible product leaders. I mean, to get into Procore, you need to be like super top notch. We have incredible, these folks are, I've never seen equal product leaders. And so they obviously they have their own teams, right? So they have their own engineering squads and they have their own UX team colleagues. So they're all in a tripod and they study all the workflows, all the steps, all the wireframes, and they validate it a lot. We run product councils as well. So we validate with our SCs, the engineers, the solution.
SCs, did you say?
Yes, the solution engineers in the field.
SE.
SEs, yeah, our solutions engineers in the field to make sure that what we're about to change is actually very, very needed, because in construction, you change a little step and it can mean a lot, right, for them. We're there to improve and to make it easier for them, right? So we have to understand what will it make it easier.
So this information comes, I assume, by speaking to your customers or your prospective customers about what innovations they might want to see or what additions or tweaks they might want to see, as well as what new solutions they might want to see. Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close?
I would just love to, because you're coming in from the translation angle, right? I always like to ask folks managing the translations team or localizations team to really understand the business side, to not just pretend like, oh, we're the last ant of the engine. No, they need to be in front of the engine, understanding the languages, the countries and the products and the platform itself. Because if you're just there like, oh, I'm just here to localize, you may be localizing the wrong thing, or you may be localizing something that was not product market fit, or you may be localizing something that's really not necessary. And I think, to me, the heads of localization or globalization need to be questioning what's coming in. It's not a ticketing service. Not everything should be said yes to, because you can cause a lot of damage. Maybe you're localizing a tool that the head of product doesn't think it's necessary, or that the regional vice president doesn't need, right? It's a business again. There's enough, there's a budget, and you need to use that budget on the priorities. And so you need to make tough decisions and be seen as a business partner, right, to the product leaders, etc.
Very good. Well, thank you. This has been a marvelous conversation with Anna Schlegel, and currently at Procore. And as I think our viewers and listeners have seen, you are truly global and have had these wonderful 30 years of experience doing this kind of work for some extremely large enterprises. And your extended bio will be on our page, on our episode page for you, so that our viewers and subscribers can see your incredible background. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Philip. Yeah. Thank you.
And I hope all of you will join us next week for another edition of Global Gurus and their stories of international business.